What happens when the school bully slaps the wrong black girl, one who's been quietly training for this exact moment? At Oak Ridge High, the cafeteria at lunchtime wasn't just a place to eat. It was a stage where social hierarchies played out in full view. It was a warm Thursday, the kind of day when seniors half paid attention and juniors daydreamed about summer. No one expected anything unusual, but when 17-year-old Alana Brooks walked through the doors, earbuds in, book in hand, her quiet presence barely noticed, she was about to become the name on every student's lips. She didn't know it yet, but in just 10 seconds, she would turn the most feared kid in school into a cautionary tale and change how everyone looked at silence, strength, and standing your ground. Alana Brooks was 17, quiet, sharp-eyed, and lived in a modest two-bedroom house just outside Newark, New Jersey. Her father, a retired Army sergeant, worked security at the local hospital, and her little brother Malik, aged 10, was the kind of kid who never stopped asking questions. Their home wasn't fancy, but it was orderly. Photos on the walls, military plaques by the front door, and the kind of silence that came not from tension, but from people used to watching the world more than talking about it. Alana wasn't popular, but she wasn't invisible either. People knew her as the girl with the book, always reading during lunch, always slipping out of crowded hallways with the grace of someone who had mastered the art of not being in the way. But that didn't mean she wasn't paying attention. If anything, she noticed everything. What no one at Oak Ridge High knew, what she had never once posted about, bragged about, or even whispered to friends, was that for the past 4 years, Alana had been training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It started when she was 13 and an older man followed her home from the bus stop. She got away, but the look on her dad's face that night stayed with her longer than the fear itself. The very next day, he enrolled her at an all-ages gym with no mirrors, no music, just mats and sweat, and instructors who didn't go easy on anyone. At first, she hated it. The drills were brutal, the adults intimidating, and the soreness never seemed to go away. But somewhere along the way, between learning how to break out of a chokehold and how to stay calm while someone twice her size tried to pin her, something shifted. She found a rhythm in the repetition, discipline in the discomfort, and most importantly, a kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to prove itself. Her dad had one rule. If you ever have to use what you've learned, you better be sure it's not about pride. It's about protection. And Alana took that to heart. She never showed off, never challenged anyone, never so much as raised her voice in public. At school, she kept her head down, focused on her grades, kept to her small circle, and ignored the noise that came with popularity and pettiness. She wasn't scared of confrontation, she just saw no reason to seek it. But that didn't mean she was soft. It meant she was strategic. People mistook her silence for weakness, but Alana understood something most of her classmates didn't. Real strength doesn't announce itself, it waits, and when the time comes, it moves with purpose, not impulse. So when she walked into the cafeteria that Thursday, just trying to find a place to eat, she had no idea the next 10 seconds would test everything she'd trained for. But she was ready, because being underestimated wasn't new. It was normal, and sometimes normal is the perfect cover. It started like any other lunch period. Alana had just finished her chemistry quiz and walked into the cafeteria with her earbuds in and a worn paperback copy of The Parable of the Sower tucked under her arm. She wasn't looking for trouble, just an empty spot to eat and read in peace. Her usual table by the windows was taken, so she scanned the room and noticed an open bench near the middle. A few students were scattered around it, but the seat across from the aisle looked free. That is, until she reached it. A large backpack sat squarely on the bench, claiming the space like a warning sign. Alana paused, made brief eye contact with the guy it belonged to. Derek Slater, senior jacket, broad shoulders, and a reputation that came with volume and violence. He was the kind of kid teachers pretended to discipline, but secretly hoped to avoid. Alana leaned in politely and said, "Excuse me, is someone sitting here?" Derek looked at her like she'd spoken in another language. Then, without answering, he gave a crooked grin and said, loud enough for his buddies to hear, "Didn't know ghosts talked." His friends laughed, 2 boys who played football with him, and echoed everything he said. Alana didn't flinch. She just looked at the bag, then at him again. "I just need a place to sit," she repeated, calm, clear. Could you move your stuff? Derek leaned back dramatically, making a show of pretending to think it over. I mean, out of all the seats in here, you want mine? That's kinda bold for someone nobody notices. The laughter around him got louder, but Alana said nothing. She simply sat down beside the bag, unbothered. That's what flipped the switch. Derek wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone like her. His grin disappeared, his jaw tightened. Then, with no warning, he stood up, stepped in front of the table, and in front of half the cafeteria, slapped Alana across the face. The sound cracked like a dropped tray, sharp and shocking. Conversations stopped, chairs scraped, phones lifted. His friends laughed louder, but even their voices carried a tinge of hesitation now. Alana's head turned with the force, but she didn't cry out. She didn't move. She sat there for a moment, the red mark blooming across her cheek, eyes closed like she was calculating breath rather than reaction. And that silence, that pause, was the beginning of the shift. Derek thought he was making an example of her, but what he didn't know was that she'd been trained for situations where people came in loud, fast, and stupid. He didn't realize he'd just crossed the line from humiliation to consequence, because Alana Brooks wasn't the kind of girl who snapped. She was the kind of girl who calculated, and that slap didn't scare her. It activated her. No one expected what came next. Alana didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't storm off or fire back with words. She simply sat there, eyes closed for a beat, like she was gathering something deeper than anger. Then, with a calmness that unsettled more than any outburst ever could, she opened her eyes and stood up. No theatrics, no raised fists, just quiet, deliberate movement. Her hands stayed open at her sides, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze locked on Derek with a clarity that made even his friends go still. There was something in her posture, measured, centered, unflinching, that shifted the energy in the entire cafeteria. Phones were still recording, trays sat untouched, no one breathed too loud. Derek, thrown off by her lack of reaction, stepped forward again, his chest puffed in performance, feeding off the moment like he was still in control. "What, you gonna cry now?" he sneered. But Alana didn't answer. She stepped slightly to the side, like she was adjusting her stance, not backing away, not advancing, just anchoring herself. Derek reached out again, probably to shove her this time, to force some kind of collapse, something to justify his aggression. That's when it happened. In one fluid motion, Alana raised her left arm, not to strike, but to redirect, guiding his incoming hand away from her shoulder with a controlled parry. At the same time, her right hand moved beneath his elbow, guiding his weight forward as she stepped aside. It looked effortless, like she wasn't fighting back, but letting him fall into his own momentum. Derek, caught off balance and confused by the sudden shift in control, stumbled forward, his legs tangled, his arms flailing, and hit the cafeteria floor hard. Not with a crash, not violently, but with the kind of collapse that robs someone of dignity more than anything else. His tray clattered nearby, and the sound echoed louder than the laughter that followed. For a full second, no one moved. Silence cracked the space between gasps and whispers. Then came the reaction, stifled laughter, murmurs of disbelief, the sound of someone saying, "Yo, she just dropped him." But Alana didn't smile, she didn't celebrate, she didn't even look at the phone still filming. She simply took one step back, hands still open, posture still steady. She hadn't attacked him, she hadn't even retaliated. She had neutralized him, and in doing so, she didn't just turn the tables, she shattered the entire script. Derek, scrambling to get up, looked around as if hoping for someone to restore his image. But the looks he received weren't ones of support. They were disbelief, even pity. He'd tried to make her look small. Instead, he'd made himself look weak. Alana calmly picked up her book from the table, placed it back under her arm, and sat down again as if the whole thing had been a brief interruption to her day. She didn't have to win a fight. She only had to show that she wouldn't be broken. And in that moment, 10 seconds after a slap meant to silence her, Alana Brooks had made the entire cafeteria listen without saying a single word. The video spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, it had made its way from student group chats to Instagram stories, and by the end of the school day, it was already on TikTok with captions like, "She flipped him with no hands," And that slap aged poorly. The footage was grainy, shaky, and filled with the usual cafeteria background noise, but the moment was crystal clear. Derek slapping Alana, Alana standing up with unsettling calm, and Derek hitting the floor with all the grace of a toppling chair. By third period the next day, the assistant principal had called both of them into the front office. They sat on opposite ends of a long conference table. Alana composed and silent, Derek red-faced and muttering under his breath. When Mr. Lanning, the assistant principal, asked what happened, Derek didn't hesitate. "She attacked me," he blurted out, voice loud, hoping maybe if he spoke with enough volume, it would drown out the truth. "I barely touched her, and she threw me to the ground in front of everyone." Alana didn't even look at him. She turned to Mr. Lanning and said, with the same even tone she'd used the day before, "I didn't attack him. I stopped him from touching me again. That's it." There was no edge in her voice, no anger, no need to convince, just facts. Mr. Lanning folded his hands and exhaled. "I've seen the footage," he said quietly, "and from what I can tell, you didn't escalate anything. You responded, controlled, proportionate." Derek scoffed, but Mr. Lanning cut him off with a glance. "You slapped her, Derek, in front of 100 witnesses. You're lucky she didn't retaliate." Just then the door opened and Alana's father stepped in. He was tall, broad, wearing a plain grey t-shirt with faded military print across the chest. He didn't speak right away. He looked at his daughter, nodded once, then took the seat beside her. Mr. Lanning began recapping the situation, offering administrative jargon about student conduct, video evidence, and possible next steps. When he finally paused, Alana's father leaned forward. "Sir," he said calmly, "I've taught self-defense for over a decade. My daughter didn't fight back. She did what I've taught her since she was 13. Hold your ground without losing control." Mr. Lanning nodded, appreciative but still cautious. "We're not planning to punish her. But this situation needs to be addressed." He turned to Alana's father and asked if he had anything else to say to his daughter before they wrapped up. The room was silent for a moment. Then the man looked at Alana and said, "You don't have to win every battle. But never let someone disrespect you and walk away thinking they were right to do it." His voice wasn't angry. It was firm, proud. Alana gave the faintest nod, and something in her shoulders relaxed. The conversation ended shortly after. Derek was dismissed with disciplinary action pending. Alana walked out without a mark on her record, and with more eyes on her than ever before. But not for being loud, not for being dramatic, for being a young black girl who refused to shrink. And the truth, now fully exposed, was impossible to ignore. Derek didn't show up to school for 2 days after the video went viral. Rumors swirled. Some said he was suspended. Others said he was too embarrassed to face the crowd, especially since his fall had been slowed down, looped and soundtracked to trending audios across social media. But when he finally returned that Monday, something had changed. The swagger in his step was gone. The forced laughter he used to weaponize had quieted. People no longer moved aside when he walked through the hallway, not out of fear, but because they simply didn't care to. He wasn't intimidating anymore. He was just another kid who got called out and caught on camera. For most students, the story had already become legend, told in snippets and memes, but for Derek, the reality lingered. A week later, as the late bell rang and most students rushed to class, Alana was walking alone toward the back gate near the faculty parking lot, earbuds in and book in hand. That's when she saw him, standing near the fence, alone, no backpack, no friends, just hands in his hoodie pockets and a look that was more uncertain than confrontational. She slowed her steps, one earbud still in, debating whether to engage at all. But before she could say anything, Derek spoke first. "I'm not here to start anything," he said quickly, eyes darting to the side. I didn't know how else to say this." Alana didn't respond, but she stopped walking. Derek took a shallow breath. "I thought I was strong," he muttered, "until you didn't raise your voice, didn't throw a punch, and somehow still made me feel small." He wasn't trying to be poetic. It came out like someone admitting something for the first time, clumsy, but honest. Alana looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I wasn't trying to make you feel small," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I was just making sure you didn't make me feel that way anymore." The words hung in the air between them, plain, powerful, and without ego. Derek nodded slowly, like he'd rehearsed a dozen other things to say, but knew none of them would matter now. Anyway, he added, I messed up. And I'm not asking for anything, I needed you to know that. Alana didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't lecture or extend a hand. She just gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Enough to say she'd heard him, nothing more. Then she turned and walked away. Not with triumph, not with smugness, but with the same quiet strength she'd shown from the very beginning. She didn't need to win. She didn't need revenge. What she had done was something far greater. She had refused to be reduced, and in doing so had forced someone who always operated through fear to finally face his own. And as she disappeared through the gates, book still tucked under her arm, the story didn't end with a fist or a shout. It ended with a girl who had never needed to become louder, to be powerful. She had just needed to remain exactly who she was. The following week, during Oak Ridge High's annual Career Readiness Assembly, Alana was invited to speak to a room full of underclassmen. She didn't tell them the story everyone already knew, the video, the slap, the fall that echoed through social media. She didn't need to. Instead, she stood at the microphone in her jeans and hoodie, no notes in hand, and said, "People will tell you that you have to be loud to be heard, that you have to push back big to be respected. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand still, stand steady, and when you do that, even the people who don't want to listen will be forced to." There was a pause, not awkward but heavy with understanding, as dozens of students leaned in a little closer. Alana didn't say much more. She didn't need to explain what had happened. By now, everyone had seen it, heard about it, or formed their own opinion. But in that quiet auditorium, with rows of wide-eyed students watching her not as a headline but as a peer, she offered something deeper than a viral moment. She offered a standard. The lesson was simple but profound. Strength isn't always about volume, muscle, or reaction. It's about control. Control over your body, your emotions, your space. In a world that often rewards those who yell the loudest or hit the hardest, real power sometimes lives in restraint. You don't have to throw a punch to make a statement. Sometimes you just have to refuse to move when someone tries to push you out of place. And when the world expects you to crumble, there's a quiet kind of rebellion in staying grounded. For every kid who's ever been talked over, dismissed, laughed at, or underestimated, remember this. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone who tries to shrink you. You don't need to match their energy to expose their weakness. Dignity doesn't come from domination. It comes from knowing who you are and refusing to become small just because someone else can't handle your presence. Being quiet doesn't mean being weak, and being calm doesn't mean being passive. It means choosing how and when you show up. It means understanding that there's more than one way to fight back, and sometimes the most lasting impact comes from not giving them what they want. Because if you can hold your ground with grace, you'll shake more walls than any scream ever could. As the students rose in quiet applause, many of them not just clapping but reflecting, it was clear that Alana hadn't just stood up for herself that day in the cafeteria. She had stood up for every student who had ever been told to sit down, stay quiet, or know their place. She didn't just change the narrative, she rewrote it. And in doing so, she reminded everyone, when you know your worth, you don't have to shout. Your presence alone is enough. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt underestimated, pushed aside, or told to shrink just to make others comfortable, remember, your strength doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. At X Daily Stories, we share real, raw, and unforgettable stories that remind you of your worth and the power of standing your ground. Subscribe now and join a growing community that believes in justice, quiet courage, and everyday heroes who changed the game, not with noise, but with presence. New stories every week. And trust us, you don't want to miss what's coming next.